Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Anna believed that she had been unlucky in life. When she was young, guys were not eager to get to know her and rarely asked her out on dates. She hated her job as a tour guide at the museum and dreamed of quitting, but stayed because she had no idea what else she could do in her life. And so her marriage didn't work out so well. With her husband, William, they met when he on his day off from nothing to do. He stopped by the museum. Not that he liked Anna that much, but it was going to be a long and empty evening. So he invited her to have a beer in the park across from the museum and chat. William was in his early 40s, but he looked older. That's because he was pretty banged up. Gray hair on his temples and an obviously tucked-in jacket. And yet Anna agreed. And the reason for that she had a significant, namely, she grew up on classical literature. Subsequently, the woman often thought that the classics is still a dangerous test for the immature mind of a teenager. Young Anna imagined perfectly well-mannered, perfectly educated, and witty cavaliers who will persistently, but without violating the limits of decency, to seek her favor. The reality turned out to be quite skillful. Those few guys with whom she was on a date did not seek to enthrall the girl, an interesting conversation, and in general any conversation. More often than not, Anna struggled to find a topic. And guys, we read something vague, and then out of the blue gave out, "I have a suggestion. Now we're going to my place to listen to music." Anna politely declined and went home. Feeling cheated, at home, she made herself a cup of fresh tea and opened one of her favorite books. Everything was beautiful there. Elegant flirting, sophisticated jokes, and of course, the constancy of men trying to win a woman's heart, not on suitors. And they also felt deceived. What they wanted was not entertaining conversation at all. Anna seemed a little strange to them. Don't touch. Most often after the first date, they didn't call her back, preferring to switch to girls who were more agreeable. By the age of 30, Anna realized that she was tired of fresh tea and literature. She wanted no longer special, as in books, beautiful love, and ordinary joint shopping trips, shared breakfasts, and trips to the dacha on weekends. That's why she finally resigned herself to the fact that the miracle will not happen. She agreed to William's uncomplicated proposals and went to drink beer in the park. And strangely enough, the man turned out to be quite an interesting conversationalist. Anna was surprised to learn that. As it turned out, in the past he was a professional athlete, a master of sports in high jumping. William dreamed of becoming a sports star, but a serious injury sustained at a regular competition stood in his way. A fractured spine is a fact that cannot be ignored. With ambitious dreams had to say goodbye. William got a job at school as a physical education teacher. Life without constant training, without a competitive spirit, began to seem bland and terribly boring to him. He didn't know what to do with his free evenings. He was bored with television. After a week of bookishness, the man was never the same. Pretty soon he discovered that alcohol is a good painkiller. When the soul will connect from shattered hopes, and with the same passion with which he used to indulge in training, William rushed into the arms of the green snake. When he finally came to his senses, it was too late, like 1,000 other lost people. William flew down the inclined plane and woke up to find that he had become a complete alcoholic. It was at this terrible moment that he thought about family for the first time in his life. Perhaps the responsibility for his wife and child will help him to overcome the craving for alcohol. And as if by order in his life, entered the strict and lofty Anna. Family life disappointed, but with its reality. From joy, common shopping and spending, she got tired after a month. And after a year, she had already managed to hate them. Little Nick didn't fall asleep well and didn't want to be without his mom for even a minute. The young woman had only a few desires left out of all their previously diverse ones, the simplest ones being to sleep all night without waking up quietly and without hurrying anywhere, to eat warm food, and to take a bath. William was at first fascinated by the life of the family. but soon felt that he was tired of monotony and routine. Besides, he was bored to hell. Eternally exhausted wife got a young friend and a mistress, and after a month another, and left to her, forgetting about the obligation to pay alimony and participate in the life of the child. Nick, on the other hand, had one great tragedy and one great fortune in his life, both of which centered in Betty. Everything that had ever fascinated him and everything that had broken his heart, everything was in her like a concentrate. No one would have ever suspected such surprises in the humble girl. No one except, of course, her mother. A mother's heart can't be fooled, never could. At least, Anna had always maintained so. She warned him, "Don't marry him, or you'll have to change everything. Your whole life. And most importantly, you'd have to think differently from now on. Because family life is an eternal responsibility that cannot be transferred to others, cannot be thrown off your shoulders like a boring jacket." From the photo on the screen of her cell phone, Anna was looking at a girl who was not beautiful, quite an ordinary face, but only if you do not look closely. And if you look closely, it became clear that the girl has very thin and correct facial features, beautiful blonde hair. "What don't you like about her?" Nick asked, laughing. "After all, just in your taste, girl, modest, quiet, without any inordinate demands, doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, doesn't wear makeup, and wants a family. Just like me. And we've been dating for 6 months. That's what I don't like about her." Anna answered glumly, looking at the girl's picture. "You see, son, in a quiet pool. Well, if she was a little more alive, maybe even a little more decent, I would believe her. It would be more natural, like, in keeping with human nature. And here she is, all quiet eyes, innocent pigtails, neatly cut with many dots. I don't know what kind of mother she was thinking about, looking for the right word, and as if it's all Maeve, or something, deliberately. And for some reason I don't believe it. I don't believe her." Nick sighed and said nothing. Mom didn't like any of his girlfriends. The long-legged one, however, was an international relations student. She loved chocolate, traveling, and also dancing and yoga. Cindy was, in her mom's opinion, a girl too sophisticated. "Did you see her lips?" Anna asked indignantly. "They're too puffy as it is, and not to hide this flaw under skillful makeup. So she paints them with gloss to make them look even bigger. And those skirts of hers barely cover her butt. No, Nick, that's not the girl for you. Trust me, she's very lazy and slutty. You'll suffer with her, and she'll go out with men. Besides, what's she studying for? Some international in a miniskirt just wants to marry a foreigner and be done with it." After Cindy, there was Julia. The girl worked in a bakery, lived with her old grandmother, and never even put lip gloss on her lips. True, it wasn't her natural modesty, but her allergy to any cosmetics. So Anna ruthlessly rejected her. She has no ambition of any kind, not even the tiniest, and you'll get lazy around a girl like that. Degenerate to the level of lying on the couch eating and sleeping. And she lives with her grandmother. People are very demanding and harmful. You'll see, she'll be tugging at her granddaughter 100 times a day, demanding attention. That the floors she will need to clean, then the windows, then buy medicine, then give her money. Molly, an aspiring singer, wasn't a good fit either. What are those colorful strands in her hair? And I noticed the tattoo on her neck. And actually, Nick, trust me, a creative wife is a real pain in the ass. She will always be looking for her inspiration and not notice that the house is already a week dirty and dinner is not ready. In addition, in the creative environment reigns quite promiscuous morals. There's alcohol and promiscuity, and she will not even realize that you, in fact, not so will flap her eyes and babble. Honey, I only love you, and the rest of them don't matter, and run off to cure another sore. Nick, by the time he broke up with Molly, already began to guess that Mom just does not want to share him with anyone. But she doesn't want to say it directly, and that's why she gives her possible rivals all the real and fantastic flaws. In some ways he understood and even sympathized with her. Anna often repeated that he was her only comfort in life, and she was right in her own way. After all, not her favorite job left her husband and lack of interests. But her mother didn't try to change anything for the better, and not even a finger to make herself a little happier. And even though Nick felt sorry for his mom, he still wanted the only person in his own life he could talk to. About that was his girlfriend, the one they'd grown up with together. "It's hard. I'm Helen," he told the girl. "Well, I understand. Her mother is scared, and it seems that here comes my own family, and everything will remain." She's in a ringing silence of loneliness. "But I'm alive too. I want a wife and children of my own. I can't sit by my mother's side all my life just because she has invented something unknown to herself." Helen nodded understandingly, thinking over his friend's words, but her gaze remained distrustful. "Nick," she asked, "is Aunt Anna a sick person? She needs constant care. I think she's healthy enough to live an active life." "Right. Well, you know her," he grumbled. "He doesn't want her to live an active life." "No, wait. That's a different question. We'll get to it later. What we're talking about now is, does Aunt Appa have a chance to live a normal life without your constant presence?" "She does." "There. Now tell me, if you get married, will you die?" "If you get married, does that mean you'll never call your mother again? Never visit her?" "Well, of course not. What kind of nonsense is that? A mother is a mother, and she can understand that." "Understand it," Nick sighed. "But accept it? Never." "Well, there we are." Helen nodded contentedly. "So if your mom is healthy and understands that even if you get a family of your own, you still won't forget about her. If it's all there, but she doesn't accept it, she doesn't want it. What we're getting to, I don't know what. It's just plain selfishness. She's used to you, like other people get used to their pets, or like a potted plant. And she wants everything to stay the way she likes it, the way she's used to it. But she doesn't think about it. Oh, good for you. What is that but selfishness? And you're fueling it as well." Nick seemed very logical to what her friend was saying. Logical, reasonable, and horrible. "Are you saying my mother doesn't love me?" Was he asking that I'm just a plant on the windowsill to her? Helen smiled. "No, of course she loves you, but as a creature not endowed with her own will desires." That sounded reasonable and terrifying, too. What if Nick didn't give up? "She just sees more than I do. Maybe my girlfriends really weren't the best." "Well, that's for you to decide, not me. Not Aunt Anna, not anyone else. Only you can know what's good for you." He knew it himself. But how hard was it to choose between his own happiness and his mother's? "I guess there are different kinds of love," Helen said thoughtfully. "But personally, I don't like the idea of it. And neither do I like self-sacrifice. Love is a gift. And what kind of gift is it that you have to pay for? A gift for payment is a purchase, a transaction. No, I understand that there are different situations. For example, you're on vacation and your mom comes down with the flu, fever. You won't go on vacation, but there is an objective, understandable reason. Your loved one needs care, but mom will recover and you can rest. And if there are no objective reasons, then why sacrifice yourself to someone else's selfishness and egoism?" "Not a reason," Nick whispered. Helen spread her hands. "In my opinion, selfishness is a black hole. It only consumes and absorbs, and it will always be short." Betty turned out to be the perfect candidate for the role of future spouse. The girl was smart, taught foreign language at school, tutoring, and at the same time she had no grandmother tattoos and excessively vulgar lips. Anna was confused when she saw the picture of the new girl. There was nothing to pick on, but it was vital to find flaws in the fragile and blonde girl. If Nick gets married, who am I going to stay with? She thought painfully. He would have a family. A wife, of course, will demand attention for money. Will take my son away from me and me. I'll be alone. I'll also have to find a part-time job. His paycheck will go to that family. No, what am I thinking? Loneliness is the worst. But money is important too. isn't it? He'll spend it on his family, and I'll have to go out and get part-time jobs at my age. Oh, and will he only go out? There are plenty of men who don't need wives or children and live perfectly well for themselves. This one just won't let up. She's hiding something about herself, Anna said. He laughed to his son the first night he saw the girl's picture. God, what does he find so funny? Mom, he put his hand on her wrist. Aren't you tired of chasing brides away from me? I'll still be your son, even if I'm someone else's husband. That's not the point. My mother flared up. Aren't you ashamed to say such things to me? She was horrified. Unpleasant that he had guessed her true motives. What's the matter then? He continued to smile softly, indulgently, like an adult who has figured out a child's trickery and is not angry at all, but is trying to explain that it is not good to deceive. It's just for coughing. Anna, it's your Betty. She's too perfect. There's no such person. I don't believe her, but you don't have to live with her, do you? That's what my son said. And if it is, I guess the main thing is that I like her. It's not for you to start a family with her. It's not for me to raise children. But I want you, Nick, to be happy. And you found a girl who is. And it's pretty obvious to me. But she's not who she says she is. And there's no telling what secret is in that box. Maybe she's $5 million in debt, or an alcoholic father, or hereditary schizophrenia. Did you think of that? And debts are the best case scenario. A bad heredity is much worse. You want kids, don't you? Marriage is easy. My darling. And getting out of a bad marriage is, what if you have kids? She noticed the downward twitch. The corner of his lips quivered. That was good. It means he doesn't completely care about his mother's words. He hears her, whatever feelings he was having at that hearing. No, Mom. Her son took his hand off her wrist and frowned. You're not going to convince me this time. I'm sorry. I get it. You're afraid of being alone, but you've condemned yourself to it. Look at it this way. Who's telling you to lock yourself up at home and never see the light of day? Nobody but you. And what's to stop you from treating my fiancé well? When you have not only a son, but also a daughter, and then you'll have grandchildren. Wouldn't that be nice? Where she lives. Suddenly, in a dry, business-like manner, the woman asked, with her parents, in her own apartment in the dormitory. Betty rents a studio apartment near where she works. The son replied, and I'll move in with her for now. We can probably get a mortgage later. Well, I see, you don't have to go on. How predictable is an apartment mortgage car loan to buy a foreign car you don't need? iPhones you have yet to pay off. Anna stood up abruptly and went to her room. She didn't feel like crying in front of her son. She locked the door and was about to let the tears flow. But she froze, looking at her reflection in the mirror cabinet. The woman slowly approached it and looked into her eyes. She had a strange feeling that she had not seen herself for a long time. And now she looked at the stranger in the mirror with a dispassionately evaluating gaze. She was 55 years old, or not very old. She looking at her reflection to understand how old she is, whether she has already become an old woman or still has the right to be called just a woman in age-oval face seems to be fine. But her skin had become dry and thin over the years. The two vertical wrinkles between her eyebrows are like thin scars, but there are almost no wrinkles around the eyes. That's probably because she rarely smiles. This, by the way, is also due to the classics she's read. The young maidens there were always mysteriously sad. That's when she learned to contain her joy. And she seemed to have succeeded. At least she had managed to avoid wrinkles around her eyes. That's not a bad result. There were frequent flickers of gray in the Russian hair. Anna's hair had once been wonderful. It was thick, heavy, with a wonderful golden cast. She was very proud of the fact that her hair had never been dyed, and her braid was as thick as her arm. But a lot had changed since then. Her hair had begun to see and sit at the tips, so some of her length still had to be sacrificed. But to paint over the gray hair she never decided. On the questions of acquaintances, why she does not go to the hairdresser and not put in order her hair. My own hair has never been dyed. When I was young, it made an impression on simple-minded young people for whom colored hair was a sign of at least hidden, but promiscuity. Now something had changed. And Anna, instead of admiration, more and more often stumbled on a perplexed look. One day after another excursion, the boss took her aside and quietly, obviously embarrassed, spoke. "You have been working with us for a long time, Anna, and you fulfill your duties well. I have no complaints about them, and cannot be." "Then what's the matter?" In an icy tone, Anna asked. She did not like this young woman, who had only been in her position for 3 months. But she had a lot of plans. She had gotten it into her head to interest teenagers, you see. And so it began. "We need to make up new excursions, some interactive and other activities. Think, gentlemen guides, how to intrigue children." Then she decided that museum workers should be aware of new theories and made them study modern scientific works. In short, Anna didn't like the fact that the snot-nosed girl was trying to fix something that was already working. And now she's made up something else. "So I'm listening to you. I'm getting annoyed," Anna repeated. "What's your business with me, boss?" Anna smiled. "I have already said that your duties you perform impeccably, but a little forgetting that in your work you work with people, and appearance matters a little. Makeup and tinted hair only emphasize your natural beauty and femininity." Anna felt her anger throwing her into a fever. It's an upstart. What kind of person lets herself criticize a grown woman for her looks? "I don't go to work to show off. I walk," she muttered. "My clothes are clean and my hair is nice. I don't have dirt under my fingernails either. And the rest is none of your business. I'm a tour guide, not a photo model." She continued to go to work without makeup as a matter of principle. She kept her hair the same. Now she perceived it as a challenge thrown in the face of her boss, and at the same time to the whole hypocritical society, which comes to the museum not to learn new things, but to admire the makeup of the guides. But now, looking at herself in the mirror and ruthlessly fixing all, even the smallest marks of time on her body and face, Anna was almost in despair. She wanted to be well-groomed and beautiful now more than ever, because then she would have hope, and hope that life would not end. When Nick was gone, hope that maybe it wasn't too late for her to meet a nice man or just have some kind of attention. Compliments. She ran her fingertips over her cheek. What immediately caught her eye was the lack of manicure. Her nails were just short-cut, but not covered with nail polish on her fingers, not a single ring, and the skin on her hands was obviously not often pampered with cream. Anna had some cream in her nightstand, and once in a while she used to dab it on her hands. But now, looking at the date of issue and shelf life, she saw that the cream has long expired. It is already 3 years old. It belongs in the trash. She'd have to buy a new one. Probably some toilet water too. A coworker's birthday present is almost out too. Yeah, she always hated spending money on makeup. It's like a bottomless pit. You run out of a jar of cream. You go out and buy a new one. Your mascara dries out. And welcome to the store. And most importantly, all that crap you wear in the morning you wash off with water in the evening. The most useless waste imaginable is spending on cosmetics. But now she was thinking about the new one too, because she needed some kind of support. By becoming more beautiful, she would have hoped that everything would be all right and that life wouldn't end with Nick gone. Still, it would be better if he never left. "Mom," my son called out from behind the door. "How are you feeling in there?" "I'm fine." "Yes," in a steady voice, she answered, but there were unshed tears in her eyes. "So Betty and I are coming over today to get acquainted. About 7 o'clock. Come by tonight then." You could hear in her son's voice that he was smiling. In fact, he seemed to be very happy with his life. Ungrateful. Anna heard him almost sprint down the hallway, and then the door slammed shut behind him. The woman bit her lip. Why? Why did her own son disrespect her so much? After all, she alone raised, loved, And now, when she is getting old and as never before needs his love and understanding, he thinks about some girls, but not about his mother. His mother is in grief, and he is happy about nothing. She looked at herself in the mirror again and immediately looked away from her reflection. It was too pathetic, the painfully drawn-out eyebrows, the thin lips, the crooked nose either sneering or trying to hold back sobs. Anna held back the covers from the bed and hovered with them in the mirror. She didn't have the strength to look at this ridiculously absurd woman, about to be abandoned by her own son, who had gone up for another skirt. Even if that ridiculous woman was herself, and it wasn't the time to look at herself, it was time for action, and that time was very short. There was no time to waste. Anna picked up her phone and quickly looked for Helen's number in the contacts. Helen, as she was called, was more often than not the daughter of Anna's only friend. Her mother was just like Anna, dragging her feet, not trying to change anything. Only unlike her friend, she'd never been married. Helen was the daughter, accidentally returned to the city of a guy who disappeared after a single night spent by a pretty girl, Kate. The girl never saw him again, and when she discovered she was pregnant, she decided to keep the baby for the most part because she was sure there was no point in waiting for her prince, and to live at least a full life, to have a family of her own. Kate worked in a library, and at some point she hated the books she used to read 1,000. But everything in the books was so beautiful. Even the dunces found their happiness with handsome men, whom God had not spoiled with brains, and who could see the mental beauty behind the unassuming appearance. It was only a pity that such clever and shrewd gentlemen fell to her only on the pages of novels. In life he was short and well-fed. All spring young people did not want to notice Kate. Kate tried to dress fashionably, but as it was a sin in fashion, were only denouncing styles, emphasizing the lines of the figure. Kate with her short, chubby legs, there was nothing to emphasize. She tried her hand at hair and face, but she had no luck there either. The bright makeup only emphasized her freckles, which didn't want to come off, and her hair was straight and stiff, and to style it seemed completely impossible. Fashionable at that time, the waves were distributed in a couple of hours, and in the end, Kate gave up trying to style it. Of suitors, all she had was a drunken alcoholic who lived one floor above and worked as a janitor. Kate was always hailed as a beauty by him. Not without mercantile intentions, though. After the usual "hello, beautiful," invariably followed by a request to help out with some change that had piled up in her pockets. That's why when Helen's future father smiled brightly at Kate and said, "You know, you're cute, especially when you laugh," the girl immediately melted from the first compliment in her life. After the birth of her daughter, Kate stopped bemoaning her unfortunate appearance and fully devoted herself to her child. Helen was luckier. As a pilot, she resembled her father. She had his bright smile, clear skin, and big blue eyes with long, busy lashes. But she was a good figure, exactly like her mother, which was Kate's constant worry. She tried very hard to control her daughter's diet and teach her only to eat healthy food. But Helen, despite any prohibitions, adored sweets and pastries and spent all her pocket money on them. By the age of 32, the girl weighed more than 100 kilograms. But strangely enough, Helen, unlike her mother, has always been surrounded by male attention. The reason for this was her easy and cheerful disposition and a wonderful sense of humor. The girl married at 20, and for 12 years she lived adored by her husband and 2 children. Even Nick recalled Anna had once been in love with this fat Helen. They were about 15 years old at the time. Anna feared more than anything that her son would make her a grandmother prematurely. But Helen only saw Nick as a childhood friend, which she never hid. Anna was grateful to her for this feminine indifference to her son, and Nick himself, though he had a strong crush on her. Helen did not resent her friend at all. It was impossible to take offense at her at all. Too sincerely, she was sincere and kind. And right now it was Helen who could help in Anna's struggle for her son. Helen greeted her with a friendly hello. "Helen, my dear, hello. It's Aunt Anna. How's mom? How are your boys? And the husband is fine. Well, that's good. Sweet Helen, I have a favor to ask of you. Yes, I need some help, and I want you to play along with something. Listen, yes, Aunt Anna, I'm listening, Helen answered. And there was the sound of water in the receiver. She must have been cooking something or just doing the dishes. Helen, I'm in trouble. Uh-oh, can you believe Nick is getting married? Again, that's a good thing. Helen laughed. It's about time. Well, maybe it is, Anna said immediately. But the girl he has is such a disaster. She'll ruin him. If you knew what kind of girl she was, you'd be terrified to sleep, wouldn't you? What's wrong with her? Oh, Helen, what's wrong with her? Well, who would tell me? You see, she comes from a very, very dysfunctional family. Her brother, the older one's in prison for theft and robbery. The younger one just went to prison for drug possession and distribution. And her mother's an alcoholic. So does the stepfather. And her own father was stabbed to death in a drunken brawl before his daughter was a year old. Yeah, well, it's no fun, Helen agreed. It's a grim story. Well, in general, Auntie, they have cases when from such families came out decent people. Perhaps this is your case. Don't be silly, my dear. Anna's voice was filled with tears. What's the case if the girl has already been treated 3 times for drug addiction? Well, Helen stretched out understandingly. Yes, indeed, a case. And what Nick has such a love for her, or just pities her. Anna let out a heavy sigh. I don't know, Helen. He hasn't told me anything for a long time. He doesn't share personal things. He's just like a horn. I'm getting married. That's all. You know, Helen, I think it's all my fault. I pushed him into this abyss. The woman sighed, as if trying to hold back the incoming tears. Helen's voice in the receiver was soft and soothing. Aunt Anna, calm down. What does this have to do with you? Why do you blame yourself? It's not me, Helen. I always wanted him to marry such a one, to be a queen, and all his girls from the marriage. And it's not like that. How much did he and I fight about that? I thought I was doing him a favor. I meant well. Helen, I thought he'd meet a girl like that, so, wow, beautiful, smart, and to be modest and a great hostess. Of course, it is necessary that she should work and get a good salary. And here she is. I'm just sure of it. Helen, that he wants to marry this one, I don't know what to call her to spite me. And it's gonna be trouble. Oh, trouble. Well, you'll have to talk to him. Aunt Anna advised Helen. Admit your mistakes. Explain yourself, or you know where the road is paved with good intentions. He won't listen to me. Helen, Anna exclaimed, you're the only one who can help me now. Please, help me. The water rushed through the tube again. All right, Aunt Anna, what can I do for you? Is that what, Anna? You dreamed. I brushed a strand of hair off my forehead. Nick's bringing that girl of his over to our house tonight. Oh, I'm all chlorine after her. Who knows? Maybe she's contagious or something. But I digress. So in the conversation, I once gently interjected that, yes, it's a pity, Nick, that you and your fiancée Helen did not explain yourself. You know, like you were gonna marry him. And then he moved on to someone else. And he didn't say anything to you, you know. Well, not understanding, Helen asked. What does that have to do with me? What's my role? And you? Lively touched Anna. At this time you run to us and make a scandal. Scream, break something, swear, slap him. Tell him you've already made the dress for the wedding. You can think of anything. Just be persuasive. Don't be afraid to overdo it. I'll pay you if you can. That nasty girl will see it and put it away. She'll dump Nick, leave him alone, and find herself another idiot. What a good idea. I don't know. Aunt Anna stretched Helen out doubtfully. I think you'd better talk to your son in a simple, human way. You don't have to do anything fancy. I'm telling you, he doesn't want to hear me. The woman is angry. Well, how will you help them mantle from the offense or not? All right, agreed Helen. Only for Nick's sake, she hung up the phone. Anna, joyfully humming, suddenly whirled around the room. A mirror caught her eye, so she ripped off its coverlet and winked at her reflection. Now a young woman was looking back at her. Her eyes shone with joy. Her cheeks, blushing all over, she looked almost pretty. Betty was already waiting for Nick to go to her lover's house for the first time and be introduced to Anna. No way around it, she joked, noticing how anxious Nick's face was, maybe just with the two of them running off to the ends of the earth and be done with it. But he was too tense and nervous and paid no attention to the girl's joke. Most likely, he didn't even hear it. Already near the house, Nick offered the girl to stop and sit down on a bench. Today's mental storm, which her mother had failed to hide, could cause problems. Nick knew his mother well and guessed that she was bound to find a way to make Betty feel uncomfortable. That was at best. At worst, she might move on to outright insults, and then Betty would rush out of the house and be glad she'd gotten away. And most importantly, she'd never want to see him again in her life. And he wanted so badly to avoid that. He'd already had so many bitter breakups that it would be enough for the rest of his life. Betty dared Nick to start a serious conversation. "We need to talk." "I want to." "No, I should probably explain something to you. My mom, she's not a very happy person. No career, no favorite job, no hobbies. Husband's long gone. She focused on me. I was kind of her comfort. And now she's getting older. Not even for her age. There are 80-year-olds who are younger than her. What about her way of thinking, her sense of self? She doesn't expect anything from life anymore, you know. It's hard to explain if you've never experienced it yourself. She's not living, she's surviving, as Betty would say. She is. She just thinks she's 50 years old. So she's old. Why am I telling you all this? Mom's very jealous. She's not happy with her life. I'm her only joy and comfort. Any woman near me, she considers me her rival. So don't pay attention, even if she acts hostile. You're just here to meet me, right? And then I promise you, you'll hardly cross paths. But don't take offense to her today. If she had a different character, more flexible, maybe she could be happy. But she's not. It's like she's been programmed to move in one rut, and she can't move a millimeter out of it. You should have warned me about this earlier, shouldn't you? The girl grinned. Then I would have thought about it. Oh, come on, honey. Nick hugged her. I understand everything, or I wouldn't have told you. I just want you to know that if she behaves unfriendly, it's not because of you, but because of jealousy. And I don't want you to get upset about it. Betty squinted, looking at him. How many of your girls has she managed to get rid of already? Come on, Betty, I just wanted you to know. So how many, tell me? It's important to me. Nick felt himself blushing. 2 or 3, I don't remember. But I've already figured out what she's trying to do. She just doesn't want to forge on her own. Though no one's ever asked her to. I see, sighed the girl. And of course, you still haven't realized what she's willing to do to get another girl away from you. No way, Betty. If we lived in the same apartment, maybe. But then we wouldn't be living with her. What's she gonna do? What's there to do? Lots of things. Betty smiled if you wanted to. You can pretend you're sick. Pretend you're dying. You can tell your friends what a scoundrel you are, that you abandoned your sick mother, and they will consider it their duty to call you and reproach you for your indifference to your mother. A lot of options. Nick, very many. You can even say that without your salary she is starving, and the money is enough only to pay the utility bills. Come on, he was horrified. Where did you read such horror stories, or see them in movies? Betty didn't answer him, obviously thinking about something of her own. Then she clapped her hands together, making the decision. Well, Nick, I'm not going to meet your mom. Why did he jump up from the bench in surprise? Betty, that's not how it works. You have to meet her. She's mine. Look, she interrupted. I'm not going to meet your mom on her turf. She's got a sense of ownership, so she's gonna have a blast. I don't know about you. I'm not as excited about that as you are. So let's try to cut our losses, so to speak. Meet somewhere on neutral territory, for example, in a cafe. She won't give herself that kind of leeway there. Of course, there are people coming in and employees. I'll feel more confident too. Nick shook his head. It's not better than your idea. Bunny in the cafe, she can also say some not very nice things to you. And then I can answer her, Betty said. Make it very clear that you don't have to behave like that. But coming to visit and fighting back against the landlady is more difficult, and in general. You don't go into a foreign monastery with your own rules, do you? So go ahead and invite your mom to the cafe. Go get her. So anyway, I'll meet you there. The cave confused Anna. What cafe? Why can't we meet at our house? Why do we need a cafe? There are strangers around. You have to spend money too. But the son smiled, handing his mother a coat. No dishes to wash. And then there's nice music and atmosphere. It's a nice atmosphere, except for a little bit. She still didn't understand, and she didn't like the whole story. The further away, the more her thoughts frightenedly darted around, contemplating one thing inexorably. This is some kind of trap. There's a catch here. But what is it? Where to look? Anna was sure the idea to meet at the cafe belonged to Betty. Nick always brought his girls home to meet his mother. Why would he suddenly abandon that tradition? So it was the girl's idea. What for? Did your Betty come up with this? She asked her son. It was her idea to meet not at home like normal people, but in some diner. Nick shrugged. Yes, it was her idea and mine. He looked at his mother expressively, supportive. Why does it bother you? I just don't get it. Uncertainly answered Anna, although everything was already clearer than clear. The girl does not want to appear on someone else's territory. And by the way, it shows that she has a brain. Right? There's no rush. And it's smart to go into a foreign field when you know you're not gonna get eaten. That's not what was wrong. Betty wants to feel like she's in control, or at least feel like she's in control of the situation. Yeah, she's a girl with claws. But it's time to put those claws to the test. We're coming, she asked me impatiently. I'm already hot in my coat. The cafe where Betty was waiting for them was very small. In fact, it was a pastry shop with a couple of tables. But the girl had chosen this place for a reason. First of all the pastries here were excellent. And secondly, Betty knew it from experience. There's no one here at this hour. People have already been here on their lunch break, which means that there will be customers here until the evening, but there will be no crowds. The meeting with Anna, if it is to take place, will be held in a cozy and quiet atmosphere, and also under such wonderful aromas. Maybe all this will be able to set the little singer on a more peaceful mood. Maybe it will all work out. I wish it would. Betty had encountered this type of woman once before in her youth and knew what monsters they could turn into at the mere thought of danger. That woman was her own aunt, who had turned inside out just to keep her son from marrying the girl she loved. Betty had known her aunt all her life as a very kind, understanding, and wise person. And that must have been the case, until William brought his fiancée to meet her. The young, sweet girl turned into a demon from hell for her future mother-in-law, who had to be immediately banished from the life of the defenseless boy of 32. She was disgusted in the bride, all determined, all her youth. You'll see, son, mark my words. She'll walk out on you while you're killing yourself at 5 jobs, and babysit your kids at night. And if she gets a divorce, all the money will go to alimony and her education. What kind of profession is a philosopher? Where is she going to work? I'll tell you, my dear. Nowhere. She'll get her diploma and shove it in a far corner. And what about herself? He sits on your neck and shines her pretty legs. These are the most dangerous predators. You look like a dandelion. But once you get married, that's when she'll show you her true colors. And even the fact that the girl loved and could cook deliciously, too, turned out to be a shortcoming and a manifestation of guile. After all, it is she specially studied to catch you fools in her nets. How's it going? And you're happy to catch your mother for dumplings. William did get married, and his mother decided that a lost battle is not a lost war and continued the fight with renewed vigor. Now she started imitating blood pressure spikes and heart attacks 3 or 4 times a week, and each time she called her son to say goodbye. Valera, tired of his mother's tricks, took her to the cardiac center for examination, where it turned out that the woman was absolutely healthy. And then he took his wife and moved to another city far away from her mother. True, he regularly sent her money and congratulated her on all holidays, but he did not come to visit and did not invite her to his place. Betty visited her aunt, invariably putting her in the most gloomy mood. And one day she couldn't stand it. She asked her why you wanted to divorce your son and wife. They're living normally. The aunt answered her with a heavy look, which bizarrely mixed pain, hatred, and self-pity. Did I give birth to him and raise him to give him to someone else? She asked, and her voice trembled. I was nauseous the whole pregnancy. I was in labor for 2 days until the baby was 1.5 years old, and I didn't sleep a wink. And when my husband left, I worked 2 jobs to feed my son and myself. What did she do for him that I should give my blood to her? Betty went home that day shaken by what she had heard. It was quite clear to her that her aunt was mentally ill. Why else would she have thought that wife and mother were 2 identical roles, and William had traded one for the other? But then she often had to see women like that. And eventually Betty came to the conclusion that maternal jealousy was a common phenomenon. She never thought she'd encounter it herself. This is that cafe. Anna grinned, appreciating the small size of the place. I thought that since your Betty had decided to meet on neutral territory, she would choose some more appropriate place where she wouldn't be ashamed to go. But the food here is very good, Nick laughed, and the portions are excellent. And everything here is probably very cheap too. A mother ate everything in such a shabby place, but it couldn't have high prices. Nick swung the doors open in front of her. Come in, Mom. I can see Betty already, he said and waved to the girl. Anna spun her eyes into the girl. Shallow, no makeup, plain. That's probably a good thing. We can press that when we talk to the son. Nick, even though he's with his family, he's still a man, and they get so stupid if you flatter them, like, say something like, couldn't you have picked someone more interesting? Such a handsome man, and suddenly you're with a gray mouse. She looked arrogantly at the girl, but she calmly endured her gaze and didn't even get up from her seat to greet her man's mother. She's still pretty badly brought up on top of that. She could have stood up, and that's a point in my favor too. Meet Betty. Nick introduced her. This is my mom. Anna, Mom. This is Betty. Nice to meet you. The girl smiled radiantly, but Anna, her smile seemed surprisingly cheeky. She didn't answer the greeting and silently sank down on the chair just opposite Betty. What do you want the girl to order? Asked Nick. I'll have the Latvian with cherries, replied the girl. And you will have black coffee and a glass of ice water. Anna was silent again, looking at the girl expectantly. It was an old, well-practiced strategy. If you just watch and remain silent, the opponent gets nervous. Then he starts to talk without a word. And most of the time he's talking nonsense. It is important not to react. Then the talker will feel himself a fool. But Betty was not embarrassed by Anna's silence. Realizing that she was not going to talk to her, she stared out the window curiously, looking at the passing cars. You creep. You don't seem to be as easy as the others. Well, we'll see. After all, I'll have a few surprises for you too. Nick returned with the order and sat down next to Betty. Not with me, the mother noted to herself, and felt a quick but painful pang of jealousy. That's how it is, so you give birth. You grow up, she doesn't eat enough, doesn't finish. And then some stupid chicken comes along, and there it is sitting next to her. And they are with the mother who gave herself to it. Mom, Nick said. And he looked stupidly solemn. We didn't want to tell you beforehand. We wanted it to be a surprise. How arrogant is that? Asked Anna. I never liked surprises. Are you sure I'll like this surprise? The thing is, continued the son calmly, that Betty and I got married this morning. Mom, you what? I felt like a hot and wicked bullet had just hit her. Not even one whole clip. For a moment she even imagined, as if in a nightmare, that the vital girl had a real gun in her hands. She slowly raises it, and without stopping smiling as cheekily, slowly and tastefully discharges the entire clip into her own husband's mother. How disgusting is that? The sneaky bastard, and spinning her boy. What about him? How could he? Nick did that to her. Married quietly, without telling her, without consulting her. Traitor. Surprise, you say, son. No, it's far from a surprise. It's a real meanness. What is she supposed to do now? I hope she doesn't find out that bitch is pregnant. Not this. Anna opened some cold water from a tall glass. You have to keep a cool head, keep your composure. And then we can try to win this game. One can at least try. And she'll try as many times as it takes to win. And that lousy Betty just sits there with an absent look and twirls her wedding ring over her puppy fingers. Yes, Anna said, trying to speak as calmly as possible. Did you manage to surprise me, son? Well, in that case, I congratulate you both, and of course, wish you happiness and every success. I still don't understand why you had to hide it, though. We just didn't want to make a fuss, Nick said. We wanted it to be just the two of us. After all, it's our holiday first and foremost. And the guests, the table, all this can be organized later, if necessary. We wanted a more intimate setting. Here was her chance. Anna could barely keep from smiling, and yet the corners of her lips trembled and rose even just a little. Yes, of course. Outwardly indifferent, she said. Put sugar in the coffee. Your father and I recall, preferred a modest wedding, too, though for different reasons. Did you? I hadn't really thought about it. There's really no need for a lot of noise. You probably haven't talked to Helen yet either. And if you had a wedding, she'd find out about it from under her eyelashes. She watched Betty's reaction, but she didn't raise an eyebrow, just kept turning the ring on her finger. And her hand didn't even flinch once. Such nerves of steel and Olympic calmness. Against her will, Anna felt a certain respect for her daughter-in-law arising in her soul, and even a kind of sympathy. Yes, perhaps she could sympathize with her under other circumstances. But this is a lousy attack on her son, on her love and attention, which rightfully belonged to the mother alone, which meant no mercy for her. But Nick stared at his mother with eyes widened in amazement. Mom, what are you talking about? What Helen? Anna looked at her son with an affectionate reproach and looked sympathetically at her daughter-in-law and shook her head. Men, she sighed, turning to Betty. You probably don't know anything, Betty. Helen is. She's the daughter of a close friend of mine. I've known her since she was born. She's a beautiful and very sweet girl. I love her like she's my own daughter. And she and Nika are the same age, grew up together, and are friends. And my friend and I, of course, secretly dreamed that one day our children would marry. Betty shrugged uncertainly. It happens all the time. My parents hoped I'd marry my dad's friend's son, too. They even tried to bring us closer together. But life has its own way of doing things. Anna sighed again. I know that very well, my dear. But you see, here she allowed herself to shift her eyebrows so that thin vertical wrinkles crept between them. It gave her a languid, suffering bohemian look. And now it was exactly what the role called for. You see, Betty. How difficult this is. Why did I have to start this awful conversation? Perhaps Nick will tell you himself. Nick, don't be silent. Say something. What did the sun blow up about? That Helen is just some girl we grew up with. That we're buddies. And that's it. You and your friend dreamed up something and you didn't bother to tell us about it. And now you're making it sound like I'm gonna take your Helen triple and refuse to pay child support. I'm not talking about Helen a long time ago. What are you talking about? How ugly you are being. Nick, with the same soft, motherly reproach, said Anna, and shifted her gaze to Betty again. I'm so ashamed of you, Son, Betty, I must apologize to you for my son's foul play. I'm sorry. Betty nodded, but nothing could be read on her face. Not a single thought, not a flicker of animation. Or maybe, just maybe, she's just dumb, sitting there stone-faced, and not even that she's not doing anything. That's the thing. Like a frozen fish. I'm so sad that I have to tell you about this. It's unbearably sad, but it would be much worse if I didn't tell you. You can't start married life by lying. And you know that, of course. The thing is, Nick, he promised Helen they'd get married. That was only a month ago. Helen was so happy, but apparently he changed his mind without telling anyone. I feel so bad for Helen. I don't know how I'll ever be able to look her in the eye again. And her mother? Well, of course Helen's worse. She's already carried a complicated napkin to her eyes. Oh, that's so hard. Helen's already prepared for the wedding. She's chosen a restaurant, drawn up a sample menu, mapped out the route of the wedding trip. I even saw her dress. She showed it to me in confidence. It's spectacular, very beautiful. And she was so anxious to get pregnant as soon as possible. Betty looked questioningly at Nick, but he was only looking at his mother. Mom slowly said, I knew you were capable of so many things just to keep me from living my life, to prevent me from starting a family. Well, that's even too much for you. You lied to me, mixed me up with dirt. What have you gotten yourself into? How could you? I innocently asked Anna. You're the one who was dishonest, although I don't understand the reasons. And you've been dishonest twice to your wife and to Helen. And I'm ashamed of you, Nick. I am, Betty muttered. Helen, why do you keep lying? Mom, you know I can call her right now if you want. She'll come over and tell me herself. I haven't said a word that wasn't true. Don't. Betty stepped in. Please, I don't want to be there after I'm gone. As much as you like. Have a good day. She got up from her desk. Nick grabbed his wife by the arm. Please don't believe this nonsense. That's a lie. I warned you, didn't I? Wait for me. We're leaving together. I think you'd better stay. Coldly, the girl replied. And please don't come to me until you've dealt with Helen. Your fiancé. There is no fiancé. Nick yelled. His face was covered in new blotches. He jumped up, threatening his wife. Look, I told you about Helen. We just know each other. Well, we played together as kids. That's a lie. Okay, please don't go. Betty, realizing she wasn't going to get away quietly, waved her hand and sank back into her chair. I'll stay, she said, if you'll stop yelling and calm down. And then she flinched at a sharp sound. The door to the cafe rattled open and slammed shut. Something huge in a purple jacket with long, developing hair whirled past them. Where is he? Where is that rascal? Yeah, where are you? I'm going to kill you now. Helen stood up, was Nick, but immediately sat back down, giving Helen a mighty hand. How dare you growl in his face? Helen, how dare you treat me like that? And this after all that was between us, after you declared your love to me, kneeling on your knees with tears begging me to be your wife. You scoundrel. She swung around and with such force answered Nick with a slap that his head to the right and then immediately to the left from the second blow. The scoundrel continued to shout, Helen, the scoundrel. How could I ever believe you? Scoundrel. She had already swung around to hit him a third time. But then Betty intercepted her hand. Leave her some for me with a smile, she asked. He is my husband, after all. Helen stared puzzled at the frail Betty, but lowered her hand. The imprints of her broad palms molded brightly and very expressively on Nick's cheeks. And my dress. Suddenly she screamed again. The dress is my wedding dress. What can I do with it now? I paid so much money for it. Custom tailoring. Who's gonna give me my money back? And I said, you bastard. And the white stiletto heels. Money back. What did you think? You promised to get married, but you're a bushwhacker and you'll get nothing for it. Helen, calm down. Nick jumped up. Are you drunk or what? What dress? Who promised you marriage? Promised. You've been married a long time. Helen, my dear girl. Anna came to visit. I'm crying. I feel Helen. Calm down, sweetheart. I'm so ashamed in front of you, and even more so in front of your mom. Betty got up, and this time no one stopped her. She left the cafe, leaving her thin wedding ring on the table. Well, it's all just figured out, Nick. Mom, what have you done? How could you barge in so unceremoniously, so rudely, so insolently? She's no match for you, son, Anna said calmly. Helen, darling, thank you. You did just fine. I even think I'd wasted my acting talent. You have no idea what you saved my Nick from. Think about going to acting school. I'm sure they'd be thrilled to have you. And thank you again. Helen smiled broadly. No problem. Aunt Anna, if you need anything else, feel free to ask. Now, I'm gonna run. Okay, time to pick up the kids in classes. Yeah, honey, sure, go ahead. Say hi to Mommy as you pass Nick. Helen gave him a friendly pat on the shoulder. Don't be sad. There are plenty more fish in the sea, and you'll find yours. Now that she had gone to the cafe, only mother and son remained. Anna was nonchalantly dragging out her coffee. It's all for the best. Nick. She tried to put more sympathy into her voice, to keep the winner's jubilation from being too loud. She had won this game after all. Checkmate. I'd better remember to buy a huge cake for Helen. Her favorite is chocolate strawberry. Let her eat it and get fatter and fatter, and she'll be there to help if she needs it. Because Nick is gonna be grieving and resentful. Then she would go off again to find happiness. It's all for the best, she repeated. Have you ruined my whole life? He said in a completely colorless voice. The ring Betty left behind. He raced his index finger back and forth across the table, then tried to fit it on his little finger. But the ring was too small for a man's fingers. I put it on only one phalanx, and there it got stuck. Calm down, baby, tiredly answered the mother. A little time will pass, and you will realize that I was right. You'll be much better off without her. She's a strange girl, that Betty of yours. I've been watching her, and it's like she doesn't care about what's going on, like she doesn't care. No, you'll be much better off without her than with her. Oh, really? You squinted evilly. Nick, do you even know who her father is? Some decent, quiet and honest man who worked at the factory all his life. Anna grinned. On weekends, beer and fishing. In the fall, harvesting. Dreamed to go to Bali on vacation. Everything is typical. Everything is ordinary. Nick hummed, and his shoulders shook with silent, hysterical laughter. A vegetable garden. Dreaming of vacationing in Bali. Her father, the head of an oil company. He's an oligarch, and that brand is mine, while his wife is still his favorite daughter. That's his parenting principle, that daddy. Children should go to school and then earn their own bread. And his fortune will go to them later, after his death. And the biggest piece will surely go to his favorite daughter. And if you hadn't meddled in our relationship and ruined it, I would have gotten something too. Anna grabbed her son's hand and said, God, Nick, why didn't you say something to me before? Go get her. Bring her back. Why, after all you've been here? Don't be a fool, Nick. Mother has lost her patience. Bring her back. She's a rich heiress. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Go get her. Do whatever you want, but get her back. And Nick took off at the speed of a bullet. Anna covered her eyes. Yes, of course, she didn't want her son to marry not only Betty, but anyone at all. But the billion-dollar inheritance was changing matters. She would be able to live a life she'd never dreamed of. And Nick wouldn't abandon his mother. Surely she could talk him into letting her live with them. And she'll try to be Betty's closest friend in the world. Oh, how hard she'll try. No, the oil company is definitely changing things up for sure. And her son will stay close to her. Perhaps her influence on him will even increase, because she will do everything she can to turn Betty into her forge. Meanwhile, Nick ran around the corner and was startled to see Helen and Betty waiting for him. Helen had unconcealed triumph written all over her face. Betty looked excited without a smile. "I saw," clapped Helen on the shoulder. "Betty, were you afraid our plan wouldn't work?" "Afraid," Betty admitted. "Very afraid. I thought maybe your mother would work you off for a few minutes." And Nick put his arm around his wife and stroked Helen's shoulder. But he looked kind of weird giving it away. "We're happy at the same time. The girls are lost," he said. "And I didn't believe it till the last minute." "How come you two know each other?" "It's very simple," Betty smiled. "Helen's kids are in my class. And since you and Helen are friends, she saw my picture. And when your mother called me," Helen added, "I knew right away who she was talking about. And I knew right away that she was lying to me and about Betty, about her family. I asked her to talk to you, Nick, humanly speaking, but she wouldn't go for it. Said you wouldn't want to listen to her. So I agreed to her gamble. I called Betty right away to tell her what a terrible plot was being hatched against her. And when I was waiting for you at the cafe," Betty said, "I called Helen and asked her to come there. It worked, and it was very convincing. I almost didn't believe it myself," Nick admitted embarrassedly, rubbing his cheek. "You have a heavy hand, Helen, I'm sorry." Her friend smiled nonchalantly. Everything had to look authentic. "It's nothing, nothing," the guy waved it off. "It's nothing. There's just one thing I don't understand. Why didn't you girls tell me about your plans? I almost went crazy. I mean, it was crazy. Well, I think I've gone crazy, or all of them. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because Betty answered that you weren't sure until the end that your mother was capable of very bad deeds for the sake of preserving her peace and comfort. And deep down, you even felt guilty. It seemed to you that you were building your happiness on the bones of your mother. After all, if you hadn't doubted, she hadn't managed to divorce you from girls time after time." Nick nodded briefly. He had his doubts. Even those words of his had been a spontaneous fabrication about the oligarch's father, a last desperate attempt to check whether his mother's actions were conscious. And that's when he was finally convinced. What he took for conscious maternal jealousy turned out to be only a carefully thought-out plan of action. His mother had consciously broken his private life because she believed that her son belonged to her and was obliged to ask her loneliness. But as it turned out, the plan could have been changed. If there was a lot of money at stake, he became convinced that his mother would never accept his right to his own life. She would never accept that right. Only her own happiness would always come first. "I don't care if it means ruining his son's happiness." And he felt sick at that realization, and he clenched his eyes tightly and shook his head. At that moment, Nick felt as if his familiar world had shattered into sharp, barbed shards. He had learned the truth, but now it seemed to him that it would have been better never to have learned it. Betty silently pulled his head to her shoulder. "This will pass, Nick," she whispered. "This will surely pass." Helen silently put a hand on his shoulder. "It hurts," she said, "but it's a necessary pain. The pain of growth. You've become a real grown man today, Nick. And never again will you allow anyone to pry into your life or boss you around." Anna's life had become even more confined than before. Now that Nick was living with his wife Betty, she had more time to think about herself. She wanted to put on a nice dress, take a walk in the park, or eat ice cream in a cafe. But she stubbornly forbade herself even these innocent pleasures. It seemed that if she let herself at least smile for a second to chase away the mournful face, and the betrayal of her son will immediately be justified. And such betrayal is not justified by anything. Once a month, Nick sent his mother a certain amount of money, but each time she sent it back. Helen consoled her friend. "It's her voluntary choice. Nick, no one is forcing her to be reclusive, to feel lonely. And you haven't done anything wrong." Betty readily agreed with her. Nick himself, though he recognized the rightness of both women, sometimes tormented himself with remorse. He realized that it was an imposed sense of guilt, that it was false. But he also realized that it would take more than a day to get rid of it. Anna did not answer her son's calls and continued to ignore any messages from him. But in her heart, she hoped that very soon her wayward son would be disappointed in his wife and would return to his native home. And then his mother will have more power over him than ever before. For now, all it takes is a single phrase, "I warned you, didn't I?" And slowly he will be tongue-tied. And on top of that, she will often remind him of how he betrayed his own mother, how he spit on her by going up after the girl. And he would feel more and more guilty before her time after time. And she would not let him do such a thing again. These sweet thoughts soothed Anna and gave her the strength to go on with her life on the saddest of days. Sometimes Helen would come to visit her, and Anna would eagerly ask her about Nick's life. But it did not bring her comfort. Helen invariably replied that Nick was doing just fine. And the only thing that upset him was that his mother did not want to talk to him anymore. But to Anna, these words were empty words. She wanted to hear that her son had married a rude, evil slacker who didn't appreciate, didn't respect him. What pleasure would it be to know that their home was filthy? Wouldn't the food Betty cooks? There is the giving pig. That was it, convincing her that it was worth waiting a little longer and Nick would return back to his native breeding grounds. But the days passed, and he still did not return. Anna thought sadly about how unfortunate it was that she was limited to only one child. It would have been easier if she had another living being attached to her. She often remembered that it wasn't her son's first steps or first words that made her unhappy. She cried over each of his new successes, because those word steps were first grade, and the last bell were like stepping stones on which he went further and further away from his mother. It made him independent. Anna's greatest fear was that one day Nick would become independent enough to stop needing her. And now that had apparently happened, she didn't know how to deal with the trouble. But help came when she was not expecting it. One day the doorbell rang, and Anna hurried down the hall, sure that it was Helen. But on the threshold stood a badly dumpy man in a worn jacket or jeans. He had his long gray hair gathered in an unpleasant bundle at the back of his head. "You have the wrong address," squeamishly said Anna, already preparing to close the door. But the man did not leave, and on his lips appeared some vaguely familiar grin. "Hello, Anna," he said. The woman's eyes widened. She recognized him now. "William," she whispered. "William, how can it be? Is it really you?" "I agree." The man nodded and collapsed on the doorstep, unconscious. Anna's life now passed between hospitals and doctor's appointments at home. After her ex-spouse passed out right outside her apartment door, Anna dragged him into the house, settled him on the couch, and called an ambulance. The doctors offered to send William to the hospital, and there it was necessary to make a full examination, and the attending doctor tiredly shook his head and unfolded some test results and medical reports handed over by Anna. He unfolded long, narrow ribbons of cardiogram. "Will your husband recover from the heart attack?" he said, "and soon enough. But of course, he'll have to give up alcohol for good. You must have known that yourself. It won't be easy for him. But there are different ways of coding alcoholism hypnosis treatment, and many people find it easier to undergo therapy in group sessions. Alcoholics Anonymous groups are also meeting in our city. Try to apply there. There are cases of very successful remissions." "I see," she nodded. "But I'm afraid, besides this opinion, what can I give you? It's hard to say what caused it. Perhaps an old spinal injury. I believe your husband is a former athlete. Master of sports in high jumping," Anna confirmed. "I don't remember exactly, but I think that's what caused it. He got injured and had to give up the sport. That's why he drank." Yes, the doctor nodded. "This is, unfortunately, a fairly typical case. It is difficult for professional athletes to break up with sports because they have been subjected to a certain schedule for years. Life is built around training and competition. Sport, if you will, is a peculiar way of life, and giving it up does not go without a trace. Many people feel cut out of life and seek solace in alcohol." "I know what you mean." "Yeah, okay. Up until now, the trauma has been overwhelming. But your husband has been coping. And now you must understand the strength of his body. Severely compromised by indiscriminate, by lifestyle and unmoderate influences. It is therefore my duty to inform you. In the next 6 months, your husband will lose the ability to walk. He'll have to accept a life in a wheelchair. Surely you can help him through this shock." "I'll try it," the woman said, "when he can be taken home." She wasn't so much interested in being reunited with her spouse as in being able to make her life fulfilling again. She was even somewhat relieved to learn that William would soon be in a wheelchair and would remain in one for the rest of his days. At least she could rest easy. He wouldn't run away from her now. So William said, "I'll live out my life like a man with a wife." At least now he's getting smart. He's living it up. The wife grumbled, adjusting William's scarf. "Come on, let's go for a walk." She confidently grasped the handles of the stroller and rolled it up the stairs to the elevator. It was snowing lightly outside, and Anna slowly rolled the wheelchair across the pavement, while William sniffed the tube. He looked around with interest. Anna nodded stately to her neighbors and walked on, trying not to notice their sympathetic glances. She herself felt quite happy because there was a man in her life for whom she was the center of the universe. And even if she had to pay for it, with hard routine work to take care of the sick, but now she was sick. Her son's betrayal no longer tormented her. Now she had something to do and a man to whom she was very important. A man who depended on her and was grateful for her care. Life was no longer empty. Now it was filled to capacity. On this occasion, she had even stopped sending back the money her son had wired to her. And she even started answering his message sometimes. William wanted to see his son, but not now, but later, when he looked better after his illness. He picked up a pair of dumbbells every day for that. He learned to shave again and tried to breathe fresh air more often, at least by the window, if the weather was not suitable for walking. Anna and her husband spent Christmas together, clinking glasses of lemonade as the chimes rang out. And Betty and Nick's apartment had a new tenant, a tiny-eyed blue baby girl who was born on Christmas Eve. Betty couldn't stop marveling at how happy and proud her husband was of his long-awaited parenthood. "My glorious little daughter," Nick said, rocking Maria in his arms, "you will soon grow up and remember this New Year's Eve. But I'll remember it forever. I will tell you how I held you in my arms and was the happiest young daddy in the world. Will you tell your kids about it when you have them?" "Okay, Maria, you will. And remember how I promised you that I would always listen to you and your opinion. And I'll never forget that you're not a toy, but a living, smart girl. My favorite girl. And you will never tell her how to live." Laughing, Betty asked, "Only if she asks me to. And if suddenly I start to get tomahawked, please better shoot me at once." And he and his wife laughed amicably.